Hello, commentary fans. This is Mike again, and we are almost done with the Frankenstein series. Two more left, which are probably, I would say, two of the biggest fan favorites of the series. And I bet you're going to guess that we're going to save arguably the best for last, but today we're doing Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, which you could argue that it's not really a part of the series, but I think it serves as sort of an epilogue to the series, and it's a fun film nonetheless, and it does really do what it sets out to do, have a grand horror comedy with the monsters. And so why not just get into it? I'm going to start the film in 3, 2, and 1. Here we see Universal International, which is the third incantation of Universal. They decided that they didn't want to do horror films, and this was really just a kind of a Abbott and Costello vehicle that was based on an idea the boys had. It starts off here with this Woody Woodpecker-esque animation sequence that serves as the title cards, and it sort of gives you a feel of the film. The two skeletons, obviously the fat one's Lou. But this started off as an idea that the boys had for a while. It's not actually their first horror comedy. It was a film called Hold That Ghost, which, if you watch Abbott and Costello films, a lot of the bits are sort of carried over in between them. Legend has it that when they were filming Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, the boys visited the set and sort of were coming up with the initial idea to do the film with the monsters. Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, of course, was the first crossover between them, and so this sort of gave them an idea. They originally, I think, wanted to do it as something of a play, and of course, that just probably wasn't logistically possible. And so they eventually revisited it later when the monsters had sort of run out of steam. A big debate is over whether to consider this an official part of the canon of the monsters. And generally, I am of the opinion that it's not. There's, at least for the monster fans, like me, there's no continuity to the previous film, and the monsters just kind of come out of nowhere. Obviously, you see Lawrence Talbot there, Lon Chaney Jr., who was cured of his lycanthropy in the last film we did, and what we have here is he's back to where he was. This film is pretty different from some of the other Abbott and Costello films. It's a lot more physical humor. Of course, the boys were a vaudeville act, and a lot of it was, a lot of word play and a lot of puns, and obviously the Who's On First is their most famous act, and it's all just about sort of vocal gags and misunderstandings and word plays, and this one we see right away that Lou gets trampled by the packages in the train station's mail room, delivery room, and they're couriers to start off the film. Here we have Lenore Aubert, who sort of plays the femme fatale of the film, and she's really, really good in this. she plays sort of the sinister character that you don't really know all that much about. And obviously, going in, she sort of doesn't have the best intentions for little Lou there, but she's so kind of really into it, and there's sort of a false sincerity that she really delivers pretty well. Look in the mirror, why should I hurt my own feelings? It was sort of an interesting idea to bring these two together because around the 40s they were the two most profitable series for Universal, and so seeing them together is really a kind of a treat. And it definitely expanded the career of Abbott and Costello, kept it prolonged a little bit, because I think one of the things about Abbott and Costello is that a lot of their humor is repeated. It's really sort of about the context and what they do with it, and so it really it's just about how they frame it. And this obviously was so new and so fresh that it's so exciting and kind of different. I mean, I believe this was really the first horror comedy, or the first really successful horror comedy. What we notice right away is that I think the reason that this film was so successful and was remembered with such reverence is that the fact that it really appeals to both fans of Abbott and Costello and the monsters. One of the things you get worried about going into this film, I think, and I think it would be a fair concern, is the fact that you have the monsters and you don't want to see them lose their dignity, and you don't want to see them act stupid. And I think, as we are going to see in this film, that isn't the case whatsoever. We see Talbot transformed into the Wolfman, and he's just as ferocious as ever, and Chaney's still really into the part. But you see Lou on the other end, he's barking along on the phone. It's done really very carefully and deliberately, and I think that's important. I know there's always a sort of discussion about genres and the phases that they go through. And the first phase is obviously the creation of a genre, and it sets up the template for everything that's to come, and then it sets up the tropes, and then eventually those tropes are expanded upon. And so, like, the first phase, we could obviously say would be the original Frankenstein, Dracula. And then sort of the tropes are expanded upon, elaborated, and sort of made more extreme. And then you could almost argue that they happen in films like The Bride of Frankenstein, or The Raven, or The Black Cat. But by the end, sort of when there's too much done with those tropes, and that they kind of lose their effect, like in a film like House of Dracula or House of Frankenstein, you see later on that inevitably the film becomes parody, and it usually happens. And it's not surprising that when something doesn't have the same effect that it had before that it just kind of, it becomes laughable, and so we have this film. But considering that, I think this film isn't downright parody of the monsters. The monsters are still very classy. I mean, Lugosi is terrific in this film. He is just as sinister as ever. The only thing is, he's in a film with Bud and Lou. Uh, but I think that's what I like about the film. It's that it's almost feels like a classic Universal film that just has Bud Abbott and Lou Costello in the action. One of the things I think that makes horror and comedy such a potent mix is that they're both very similar in their intents. You sort of see the intent is very similar in the fact that they both want that sort of catharsis. They both really want big reactions, and even the characters, I would say, Bud and Lou, are sort of similar in aspects to the monsters. They're both characters trying that are kind of outsiders in their films. People think that they're clowns, and they're just sort of, people don't take them seriously. And, you could say that that's sort of similar to the Frankenstein monster in a lot of ways. He's sort of ostracized by society in the same way. And, like Louis, sort of a big kid and a big kid. Obviously, I was going to say big kid and a imposing body, but that's not Lou at all. It was just sort of stuck there. Lou Costello wasn't a huge fan of this film, at least the first draft of it. He thought it was really, really stupid. And I could sort of see why, because this is, like I was saying, is sort of a different kind of movie for them, and it really it's different in some ways in that it's Lou himself is carrying a lot of the film. Like you see, this is a good scene. You see Lou, he's genuinely afraid. He doesn't want to open Dracula's coffin, obviously. And, he's sort of sweet and childlike in that way. It's like, he's definitely like the sort of, a kid seeing a monster movie and not wanting to open the coffin and see what's inside. Just being there is horrible enough. Here we have an example of what I was saying earlier about Lou having to carry the film. A big piece, or a big, point of this film is that a lot of the humor is generated by Lou being the only one who can see the monsters, and he's the only one who interacts with them for a lot of the film. And you see Abbott doesn't believe in him. It's that's sort of a tired horror cliche in some ways. Or, it's like even a horror film, I think the really bad ones use that as a way to sort of prolong the plot. I think what's different here is that Lou is very he really has such comedic energy, and he really goes all out with it, which is a lot of fun. This sequence is borrowed pretty heavily from Hold That Close, but I think this one's actually a little better. And this is actually sort of going into what I was saying earlier about how this could, unlike a film like Young Frankenstein, which is a parody, that this is actually sort of a horror comedy in some ways, in that it's lit really, really well. This is seen as pretty atmospheric. It's, it feels like an actual horror film. Earl Kenton, who directed, the last few films we've watched, House of Dracula, House of Frankenstein, The Ghost of Frankenstein. He actually, sort of being a journeyman at Universal, he directed a few of the Abbott and Costello films, but this is from Charles Barton, who hadn't really directed a film like this before, and he really stages the monsters pretty well for the most part. They have a lot of effect in this film. Yeah, you see, Lou has his energy, his same consistent comedic energy, but it's more physical, I see. And, he's so scared he can't even do it. He's sort of, just waving his arms around here. It's really kind of cute. Of course, what is a big draw to this film is the return of Bela Lugosi after 17 years to Dracula on screen. Of course, he had played Dracula on stage and would continue to play Dracula on stage even after this, but he never appeared as Dracula in any of the Universal sequels. He'd played other vampires, obviously. But by this point, Lugosi is he's still working, but it's very much a lot of bit parts. Like the sort of Poverty Row pictures have sort of dried up, even though, they're still playing across the country and sort of, they're just like not, he's not getting work in film at this point. He's doing a lot of summer stock and personal appearances. But he had an agent at this time by the name of Don Marlowe, who he had met earlier. I believe he was an actor as well as an agent, and he's trying to get him any sort of work possible. He's doing a lot of revivals, summer stock of Arsenic and Old Lace and Dracula, and Marlowe finds out that Universal is planning on making this film, and they initially were not planning on using Lugosi in this picture. I mean, that just seems inconceivable. I believe one of the names that I've heard that was going around was actually Ian Keith, who was rumored for in 1931 as well. But I've even heard rumors that Universal just thought Lugosi might have actually have been dead. But Marlowe, he hears that they're making this film, and he goes into Universal, and this is one of the great stories of Lugosi's life, because Marlowe goes in and he basically guilt trips them into casting Lugosi in this part. He says that he basically is honest. He says that after all Lugosi did for this studio in the past, and all the horror films he had made, and the great success of Dracula, that they owed it to him to give him this opportunity. And they did. And he's not in the best of health here. He really, I think, sort of shows his age in some ways. They sort of hide it with the makeup. And but he's still tremendous in the part. He's very imposing, and he still has the creepy, charismatic effect. This sequence is actually sort of frightening in a way, even though you just have Lou Costello, and he's at Dracula's mercy. And Lou actually plays it really, really well. He looks sort of dumbfounded and completely powerless in this sequence. What we have here is Glenn Strange as the monster. One of the rumors I've heard is that Karloff might have been considered to reprise the part. And, that would have been pretty fun, but there wasn't any truth to it. Karloff famously said, "I will promote the picture if I don't have to be in it." And so there's a lot of cute little photos of him getting in line to get a ticket to the film, but he doesn't actually see it. Of course, Karloff would eventually appear in 2 Abbott and Costello films, the sort of horror follow-up to this called Abbott and Costello Meet the Killer, Boris Karloff, and he's, surprise, surprise, he's not the killer in the film, he's the red herring, and then he plays Dr. Jekyll in the only Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde film Universal made, Abbott and Costello Meet Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I think this is pretty good. This is like the only film where Strange actually gets to do some things with the character. You see him actually talk, and he expresses himself more on the face. It's almost like Herman Munster when he goes to Lou there. This film sort of, I think, had a lot of implications for the sort of gothic horror around this time. I think in a lot of ways it sort of ended the idea that these gothic horrors could be, these gothic horror characters could still be frightening, and it wouldn't be until Hammer that they would be able to have the same effect that they once had. Lon Chaney Jr., who we saw earlier, really hated Abbott and Costello. There's an interview from the early 70s that's on YouTube, and I might actually link to it, but it's pretty interesting. It's Lon Chaney Jr. sort of having a retrospective on his career and talking about what he thinks of horror films. And he said that after Abbott and Costello, every horror film kind of became a comedy. And I think that's an unfair assessment, but I do sort of see the frustration. with the film. I could empathize with it because there are moments in this film where it's sort of awkward in a lot of ways. You know, it works in some moments, but in others it's sort of, I don't know, like a little too much. Uh, I would say that the Wolfman is generally the monster that sort of gets the worst of it in this film, or in terms of, I don't know if I would call it being made fun of, but definitely, having that ferocity of how Cheney would play the part mixed with Luke Costello's humor, it kind of does look awkward and maybe out of place a little bit. One of the things that um, one of the things that the film sort of did with Lugosi was he, was so desperate to remarket himself that a lot of his films after this were supposed horror comedies. Um, he appeared in a movie called that I think he sort of thought would be another film in this one, which I think is probably his worst movie. It's called Vampire Over London, which has a British sort of comedic character, kind of a cult character called Old Mother Riley, played by a British comedian called Arthur Lecan, and it's pretty unwatchably bad. Lugosi's into it though in his little scenes, but this Arthur Lecan, he's just awful. Like, he plays this old woman and he doesn't look anything like it. It's like the fakest drag thing ever. And you see Lugosi as this vampire character sort of flirt with him. And then, of course, he famously played in a film called Bela Lugosi Meets a Brooklyn Gorilla. And I mean, surprise, surprise, the title sounds so much like this one, in which he's this professor in the jungle, and he's teamed up with Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. Pretty much, they're impersonators, but you could almost call them plagiarists in some ways. I mean, I think even they tried to sue to stop them, and that film's pretty bad too. And so, it's kind of the final insult to Lugosi in some ways. And it's nothing really to do with this film, but I sort of sympathize with Lugosi, and I see Cheney Jr.'s frustration with the direction that this film they felt had on their career. And that they see that these monsters that they had played with such dignity and with such passion, and in Cheney's case, the ferocity of the Wolfman, and to see the fact that audiences kind of inevitably had kind of grown tired of the characters, and that the only way they could keep up with the audiences is if they were able to do them as horror, as comedies. Here's the biggest example of this, and this is a really interesting scene. You see Lawrence Talbot enter the picture, and Cheney is actually really good in this film. It might be his, I don't know, third best performance as Lawrence Talbot. He's really, he's given sort of a motivation in the film. He doesn't just want to die or be cured of his lycanthropy. He becomes a sort of a Van Helsing-esque crusader because he's actually knows what the monsters are, and he feels that it's his duty to stop them. And he's really, really into it. And then you see the banter off of Costello. It's really kind of fun. This is, of course, as I brought up before, the first film where Jack Pierce isn't doing the classic makeups on the characters. We have Cheney Jr., we saw his transformation of the Wolfman. And what you'll notice there is that it isn't quite as elaborate in some ways. I think Universal sort of cut down maybe the budget a little bit. Obviously, they wanted to make the whole thing more cost-effective and time-effective for the movie, and that's one of the things that is noticeable about the makeups in some ways. What they did was they used foam rubber pieces instead of, building up the hair on the Wolfman or, the cotton and collodion on the monster. And the makeups, they're still effective, I think, and certainly probably more comfortable on the actors that wore them. Actually, they're durable in some ways. One of the documentaries on this film, Bud and Lou Meet the Monsters, I believe it's called, you see Bob Burns, who is probably the most, the most famous monster collector outside of Forey Ackerman, who has so many of the props from these films and the posters and the collectibles, and he has an example of surviving makeup piece from this film, sort of the flat-headed top that Glenn Strange wore, that Bud Westmore designed, and it's kind of fun to see it because it's a kind of interesting looking appliance, and it's sort of unimpressive now, but you see the scar and the flat top where they'd add the hair. And supposedly when they took off these appliances, they would sweat and drench sweat in them. And, that's the kind of thing where they lose a lot of weight. See, this is an aspect of the Bud and Luke comedies that I really, really, really like. The fact that, Bud and Lou are sort of always working men, trying to make it in the world. You frequently see them as sort of doing menial sort of customer service jobs. I know in the next monster film, they play a hotel busboys, and Abbott's the security guard, and in this one they're the little baggage clerks, and it's always makes for good comedy, I think, because you definitely sympathize with the characters, and they're more enduring and heartwarming. Chaplin, I know, really did that to great effect. Showcased LeTramp as a member of the poor and huddled masses, and so you definitely rooted for them. I think Bud and Lou are able to do that pretty well as well. Yeah, she's not so subtle, Sandra, there. Talking about what does he have that I don't, a brain? And Abbott's like, I'd like to know where it is. This is a great subplot of the film that Bud supposedly or not Bud, Lou, of course. Wilbur supposedly is such a Casanova that he gets these two beautiful women to be smitten with him, and then the audience looking in knows that they're both up to ulterior motives, that they just want to get something from Lou, and then they act like they're so in love with him, and Lou gets cocky from it. Oh man, this is like when this piece of the film really plays into the strengths of the comedy of Bud and Lou. Just sort of how the jealousy between Bud and Lou, and how they go into it, and how this is a great moment here. I want to look at you in the light and see what was going on. And he moves around now. So, I'll send you. You don't even appeal to me. See, that's what I would say would be one thing about this film that's sort of where it's different from some of the other entries in the Abbott and Costello series, is the fact that since so much of the film is about sort of being in the wrong place at the wrong time with Lou, and the aspects of his relationship with the two women. There's a lot of scenes where Bud and Lou are sort of against each other. Bud's more angry at Lou, and that, I don't know, that's sort of in some ways hard to see, because I just think they're funnier as a team. Obviously, the most famous one is a misunderstanding one, but the misunderstanding of who's on first, but they're not mean or malicious to one another. It's just sort of the confusion of it, and that's a large part of the film. And here's going back to what I was saying earlier about how Chaney Jr.'s really, really into the film. Like, he rushed up there and almost like lifted Lou up ferociously, and that's just it's kind of interesting to see these two very different acting styles going off there. And that's one thing you say about Lou, is that he really knows how to do this film, because it's tricky. Do you want to play it for just a laugh? But if you do that, you run the risk of making the monsters lose their effect, and this film is built off of the fact that Bud and Lou are terrified of these monsters. But how do you like that? I speak French too. It's the kind of quick verbal humor that really Makes you love Abbott and Costello. Here's a pretty interesting set, and this is supposed to be in Florida. It's really kind of out there, you know what I mean? That there's this huge castle in the middle of Florida. One of the things that, I don't know, that you forget about this film is that it started off, I think, as sort of it starts off as really just another Frankenstein film, I think, in some ways, that it feels like a sequel to the other Frankenstein films. Really what it evolves into is just another brain swapping film. And I don't know. It's kind of interesting, you know, going into it again, that the film is really just another Frankenstein film with Bud and Lou put in it. There's another third girl would fall in love with you. Naturally, should have to be. That's a fun aspect of the film. You know, it's cute to see Lou. You know, like part of the huge humor of his shtick is that he's, you know, such a I don't know, kind of small guy, and so he's such a small guy, and then, you know, obviously there's a lot of image issues with him, and that they always put a bin over his head. And this one, he kind of buys into the idea that he's a Casanova. Dr. Leos has been receiving a lot of electrical equipment. You're in the house of trouble right now. Killing the monster that live here. See, this is the fun, another fun little trope that they go into, and it really is pretty impressive. It's a large set piece where they actually search the castle for the monster, and you know, that, like we've already sort of discussed the tropes of a haunted house movie in the Raven commentary. And this basement set that they go into is really, really, really impressive. One of the things that, you know, it does is feel like something that in a real horror film. It looks actually more impressive than some of the sets that were in the House of Frankenstein and the House of Dracula. that's always something that these Bud Abbott and Costello monster pictures had, was usually one really, really impressive set piece. And since this started it off, this one actually has two. The finale is really action-packed, and this scene is really big too. But they would always have a set piece that really showcased kind of a scope that the boys didn't have before, and it would always be sort of perilous to remind you that there was actual danger in the picture. In this one, we sort of have this sequence here with all the missing walls, where Lou obviously is with the monsters on the other side. And then in the next picture, Abbott and Costello meet killer Boris Karloff, which is not really all that great a picture. It's really sort of just feels like a bottom of the barrel mystery that they kind of quickly rewrote to have Bud and Lou in it. I believe I read that it was sort of a Bob Hope movie that wasn't good enough to make. But there's a great sequence in the caverns, which is just huge and imposing, and like it feels perilous. And Lou, it's funny and thrilling at the same time. It's a great sequence. And here's another really fun part where Lou interacts with the monster, who, you know, he's still sort of lifeless, but you know, it's fun seeing Lou bring attention to that lifelessness. This is a film that actually has some outtakes and filming, you know, some outtakes that still exist. And, you know, Lou would love to, you know, he's so fast that he would improvise. And you'd see him in the lap of Glenn Strange there. And, you know, it would just be so hard. I could certainly sympathize with Glenn Strange that he just would burst out laughing. And that was just another example of how these films were really, really different from the monster films in the past, you know. Just sort of going with these different styles of acting and styles of film. I love how Lou tries to explain it and reenact the monster. He takes his coat, his impression of Lugosi is terrific. And like, this sequence is good, but it sort of, you know, stretches some of the credibility that the film has built up so far, and, you know, not going too much with the monsters, going into the humor for humor's sake. This movie does really brilliant lighting. There's a lot of use of shadows in it. And you see Lou running back and forth. The shadow sort of expands. It reminds you some of the expressionist films in some ways. And that would sort of certainly be a fitting sort of to see, you know, that this film, which really is the end of the first wave of Gothic horror, sort of pay tribute to the beginning of it. Here we see one of the biggest links to the original Frankenstein series. The Frankenstein records have found their way into the hands of Dr. Lorne Wilbur's girlfriend. And of course they don't trust each other at all, but this was actually just, they didn't want anyone else to come, and it's just a ruse to get Lou there so Dracula can have his operation. This is a great, great laugh. It just comes out of nowhere. Luz is just sitting so intently on that chair, and, he is just out of nowhere. He starts screaming. He goes, "Who screamed?" And when I see what I see, I saw it. Here we have Lugosi as Dr. Lemos, and sort of speaking about what I was saying before, there's so many outtakes. This film actually was really into the keeping the atmosphere on the set very jovial and high energy, and so on all the Abbott and Costello films, they would have sort of a comedian on the set, really who's just there to keep everyone laughing and keep the energy up. And he isn't actually in the film. His name was Bobby Barber, I believe, and there's a sequence in the film where he goes behind and follows Lugosi down the stairs when he's playing Dr. Lejos, and is sort of making fun of him, really. And it's kind of a sad scene to see, and Lugosi is just furious. But I guess that's just one of the things about Lugosi and how he would interact with comedy. This was this could have been, this wasn't a film that would, this wasn't a film that really played into his strong points in some ways. Like the story about Red Skeleton that was reenacted in Ed Wood with Martin Landau, where he's on the live television show, and the Red Skeleton character starts improvising, and Lugosi can't keep up with it. That actually did happen. And Lugosi was such an intense actor. There's always stories of him really going into the character, and just like he wasn't the kind of guy who would hang out with people on set. He'd really be in the back studying the script and going into, really trying his hardest to absorb the character. And so in this film, when they had someone like Bobby Barber moving around, making jokes, and I've heard that there were pie fights on backstage, Lugosi didn't really want to participate. Some people, I've heard arguments that they actually prefer Lugosi as Dracula in this film to Dracula in the original Dracula. And before I forget, this sequence has another one of the flubs where you see Lugosi's reflection in the mirror. And that sequence is actually kind of horrifying. Lenore Albert really does it well. There's a really sort of a sick, or not sick, but it's sort of like a look of pleasure on her face when she's bitten by Lugosi. To pick up those bundles and get dressed. One of the things that people use in terms of assessing Lugosi's performance in this film is that it's a very different kind of film. Obviously, it's very fast-moving, and so there isn't that sort of hypnotic quality to everything. And so I think Lugosi, you're able to see him a little bit more. It's not as deliberate, and he's able to have some more fun with the part. But there's still that ferociousness to him. And, to be fair, Charles Lee Barton does a good job with some of the sequences, and like the close-ups of Lugosi's eyes are all very frightening. And, obviously the scene earlier, we saw the sequence in the House of Horrors where Lugosi hypnotizes Wilbur, and that's very effective and very frightening too. Here is probably the biggest joke at Lon Jr.'s expense. You see chick put on the wolf mask, and he's so nervous about it. I know you'll think I'm crazy, but in half an hour the moon will rise and I'll turn into a wolf. You and about 20 million other guys. It's a good laugh, and Shady's response is like dialed up to the extreme, and it's just kind of showcases how this film is so one of a kind and odd. And this sequence here is the only time Talbot and Dracula meet. He's in House of Dracula at the same time as Dracula, but you notice that they never spoke with one another, that Edelman was always busy with Dracula at the time. And, it's sort of interesting. You wonder if there was a good storyline in between these two films. Just you consult your physician, Mr. Talbot. And take him along with you, please. That's just one thing I will say about this, and it's not to Lugosi's fault. Lugosi just doesn't have the same sort of sex appeal in this film. He is still very effective in the character, but just he's not imposing in the same ways. Poor Lon Chaney Jr., after this film, I guess he suffered a major bout of depression around the end of this film. I guess there was sort of a huge argument he had with his teenage son, and he tried to kill himself in this film. After this film, and sort of they used the rationale that he was working on the film as the reason for why he tried to kill himself. And I guess he was in critical condition for a little bit, and it could have been the end. And you sort of see why he had such a negative sort of reaction to the film. But he would appear in some later Abbott and Costello TV shows. And this wasn't the first Abbott and Costello film Lon Jr. was in. He was in, I believe, don't quote me as 100%. It's called Here Comes the Coeds. I haven't seen it, but I know he was in it. And it can't be for very large part. But he appears later in a Abbott and Costello Colgate comedy hour skit. It's pretty bizarre. It's a pretty bizarre sequence. It's Lou sort of doing an opera number, and out of nowhere, it could have just been anybody. I wouldn't be surprised if they paid Lon Jr. to use his name, but he's the Frankenstein monster, and he dances awkwardly on the stage. And it's just sort of disappointing in some ways. But that was an interesting sequence that I really, really enjoyed. It's a cool image of seeing the bat flap its wings in the eyes. It's something that hasn't been done before, and this score is actually pretty good. It's done by Frank Skinner, who I already did a lot of commentary about him and the Man of a Thousand Faces commentary, which I thought was pretty terrible musical score. But this one, it's really sort of a good score. There's a few motifs in it that I think are pretty effective. Obviously, in this film, you sort of have to do some horror themes and sort of lighthearted comedic themes in there. It doesn't use the sort of stock music that had been done before. Here we have another Wolfman transformation, and I guess Charlie Barton, who had done these horror films, actually designed this one himself, and filmed it himself, and it's still kind of effective. I don't know if it's still John P. Fulton doing it, but it works, and it's sort of interesting. I think this one works well in the fact that it looks somewhat better in the terms of the color on the Chain's face. Yeah, like I was saying, I think the Wolfman sort of gets the worst in the film in terms of being sort of parodied. I don't know. Like, there are moments where he almost gets directly made fun of, and this is one of them. It's a good gag. That you see a mistake Talbot as the Wolfman as Chick, and it's kind of funny there. He actually gets to the point where the gag escalates to where he pounds on the face of the Wolfman there, trying to get him to take the mask off. All right, here is something that's really, really pretty interesting, and it's a moment that a lot of monster fans put stock in. During this night, the Wolfman goes and bites McDougal, and he survives it, and so you're led to believe that at the next full moon, this Mr. McDougal, who's just a kind of antagonistic big mouth, will be the next Wolfman, and it's sort of fun. I know there's a section of monster fans that like to think that this is part of the official canon, and so if it was, then it assumes that Cheney has regressed into his lycanthropy at the end of this film, and so what you're led to believe is that the reason that the Wolfman satisfactorily might have been able to die is because he passed his curse on. There we have the first actual instance of Dracula turning into the Bat, and it's done by the Woody Woodpecker cartoon artist Walter Lantz again. And it doesn't necessarily look all that well. I think the best example of it was we already saw in the Carradine film. And yeah, that's kind of sort of fake looking. But we'll see Bud finally see that what's going on is very, very real, and the film almost over by the time that he comes to the conclusion. We're just about to see the final act of the film. Here we have Lon Jr. waking up again. And I'm sort of glad that he's not wearing his mustache again. McDougal is already out on the prowl. One of the things that Lon Chaney Jr. is around this time is doing is that it's kind of interesting. He wants to start up his own horror studio with Kurt Siodmak, who of course we already discussed at some length in the Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman commentary. And he, I think, uses it as a way to sort of counter what he thinks is wrong with this film. He's got a treatment called Lizard Man, which I guess Lon Chaney Jr. wrote a few horror films. None of them are produced, to the best of my knowledge. But one of the things in that other interview is that he thought that Abbott and Costello sort of took the sympathy away from the characters, and that you're meant to laugh at them. And so, I don't know. It's just interesting to consider this. This is a really goofy sequence. You see Lou in a headlock there trying to get locked out. It's almost like he's talking to Sandra as if he's his wife, and Frankenstein is Junior. That's one thing I'll say that this film might have benefited from, is that if Frankenstein, this monster, had more of a character arc and maybe interacted with Bud and Lou more. You know, it's just sort of sad. All he does is in the film is sort of just stand and lie there and, you know, come to life. At least he gets some dialogue in the film, even if it is just yes, master. Here we have the Frankenstein, or Lugosi's got the little piece on his ring that sort of keeps going. I wonder what, I don't know. This plot, I think, is really just more of the same. And, you know, even though I was saying it was interesting, I think what could have been even better is if they did more with the Frankenstein character at the end. If he had a moment where he defied his master. You know, and that's generally something I think is pretty good in the Frankenstein story, or would have improved upon We already discussed the character Igor and his relationship with the monster. In fact, one of the original um, ideas, or working titles of the film was The Brain of Frankenstein. That probably wasn't a good idea because people would have just thought it was the same old. And calling it Abbott and Costello Frankenstein was a pretty inspired idea because it sort of, plays with the crossover nature. Obviously it reminds you of Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. Here's this Professor Stevens character is just sort of a boob. He's kind of, a handsome guy, and obviously he's the one who's going to win Joan Raymond's hand at the end of the film, sort of reminding you that a guy like Lou can never get a beautiful girl. You got Lon Chaney and Bud Abbott, almost the same almost the same costume there. Lugosi, after this picture, did some comedies, and one of the things I think he wanted to do was be in more Abbott and Costello movies. I know the original idea was the original idea for the sequel to this was, the film that would become Meet the Killer, Boris Karloff, and Lugosi. I know there were a few interviews where he's saying he wanted to be in the film and that, he really was gung-ho on the idea of doing comedy. And it certainly would have appealed to him. I know I believe he did appear in an Abbott and Costello radio episode in addition to this. But one of the things I think appealed to him about comedy was the fact that it was different and that, it really was able to let him to do fresh nuances in the horror roles. He would frequently say that Igor was one of his favorite roles, and as we discussed, there's a lot of dark humor in The Son of Frankenstein, which is really sort of subtle and black, and it takes a lot of dry delivery to do it right, and Lugosi was pitch perfect in those films. And in this one, he's really good too, despite the fact that he's very menacing. But in this film, he doesn't really actually do a lot of comedy, which I think is why it works. There's funny moments with him, but he's very much the villain of the picture. And, I think he didn't realize sort of, that the comedy could be a trap and that it would, force him to sort of give up the dignity that he had, that these characters had. And we see him in some lesser films. Yeah, see, I think that this film, I love that line, "I can handle our fat friend." He kind of makes him sound like almost a Bond villain in some ways, and it's just a great line of dialogue that Lugosi really delivers pretty perfectly. Just the idea of the same Dracula from the original picture delivering that line is pretty funny. I mean, even if the scene is pretty, it's just really a filler scene. That's a good line. and and of course, that's a good close-up of Lugosi. Really, even though he is obviously I would say a little too old to be playing the part. You really see him go into it, and the ferocity in his face is still very much, the ruthlessness in his face is still very much there, and that's a good. He goes out of his trance and sort of skips along, and Talbot's like, "Now where'd you go?" I think one of the things that's sort of interesting to discuss about this film is like where these actors sort of ended up after the monster films. And a lot, of course, is brought up about Lugosi that this is his last great film, and it's obviously his last big movie with a studio. Abbott and Costello did just fine after this. They made a few more monster films, and but Lon Jr., I think it's really interesting. He actually does pretty well. I think the best out of any of the monster actors. Or you could even argue that Glenn Strange, even though I don't really consider him a horror icon, he does okay. He's on Gunsmoke. But Lon Jr. Would appear in some great bit parts. He ends up in High Noon, which is really one of the high points of his career in the Stanley Kramer pictures. And even Spider Baby, which is another horror comedy, he's really, really terrific in. It's sort of in the line of this film, even more sinister in some ways. Here we're entering the action-packed finale of this film, and you actually get to see the Wolfman fight Dracula, which was actually an idea that they were actually sort of playing with in the 40s. They're going to do the Wolfman meets Dracula, and it was going to end with a big sort of fight like that. I don't know how serious that was actually in consideration. There's a book about it by Philip Riley, which, I don't know how much I'd recommend that, because he's sort of, I don't know, there's some parts where you could sort of question the authenticity, but if it was true, it sounded like a cool concept. Just seeing Lugosi interact with Chaney would have been a lot of fun, but here you do get to see it, the Dracula and the Wolfman fight one another. I guess poor Glenn Strange really hurt himself really bad around the end of the filming. He really hurt himself bad. I think a piece of one of the props fell on his leg or something. He broke his leg and he couldn't finish some of these more intensive sequences. And Lon Jr. Went in and covered the part for him. And you can sort of see Lon Jr., he's not as tall and imposing as Glenn Strange. You sort of see obviously his face is very different. You sort of see that one of the most notable scenes is when he throws Dr. Mornay out the window, Sandra. Here's one of the reasons why I don't like to consider this part of the main continuity of the original Universal series, is because the monsters really kind of get a lackluster ending in this. You'll see once this battle between Dracula and Frankenstein, or Dracula and the Wolfman ends, that it's sort of disappointing to see what happens with how the monster ends. He thinks I'm Dracula. That's kind of funny. Really, it takes you out of the moment a little bit, but just how high, just kind of the speed of this finale, and just sort of how well Lou really does it. Just you forgive some of that moments, even though they don't really work all that well. Yeah, this is really test the boys, like I said. This is so physical and so fast paced. That wasn't the kind of films that they were kind of humor that they were used to doing. It's almost like a Three Stooges sort of comedy in some ways. Yeah, here we go. The Wolfman falls into the water, and if we're led to believe that is the end of the classic monsters, then you can't help but be a little sad. You wish the monster got a little more grand, and that'd be the last we'd see of these characters. And I didn't expect them to make monster movies forever, but it just kind of in retrospect, as a fan, it is sort of disappointing. Here we have the end of the McDougal subplot, where the monster obviously walks out, and all Lou can tell him is, "You still want one of your exhibits?" Comes one of them now. Oh, that's satisfying to see that jerk see the end of it. Even though the monster, he does get the biggest sort of, well, I mean, Glenn Strange monster, he gets sort of the biggest thing, sort of finale in terms of things to do. This is the most we've ever seen him on his feet. But just like what they do here, it just kind of goes against everything the monster had done up until this point. You see this sort of boring character there, Dr. Stevens, start a fire, and the monster just stares dumbfounded at it and starts actually walking into it. And if you're a fan of that character and have followed him over his 17-year history at the point, it's even more disappointing than seeing the Wolfman and Dracula go out that way, and that's such a fake-looking dummy that falls through there. Well, it's a fun movie, and it's even more fun. Here we see Vincent Price reprising his role as the Invisible Man, which he actually had played in the 1940 Invisible Man Returns. And, it's sort of a cute little symbolic ending because, of course, as we know, Vincent Price is sort of the next big horror icon. You see Bela Lugosi and Lon Chaney are sort of forced in this film to pass the torch to Vincent Price there. But it's sort of appropriate in some ways. And in some ways, Lon Chaney Jr. was right in that this sort of movie turned horror films into comedies, and because you could argue that a lot of the Roger Corman pictures were sort of comedic and lighthearted that Vincent Price himself appeared in. But what you know is that you can't keep a genre down on that. Obviously people did become more interested in the monsters over time and wanted to revisit them, and the next big example is Hammer. and they were able to bring these classic characters back to life and bring them to new places. And so Universal, I think, has had a lot to be proud of. And this film serves as a great epilogue to that series, and that's really what I think about this film. It's a great companion piece, a great epilogue, and it's a lot of fun. Obviously, Bud and Lou have so much energy, and it's just really a one-of-a-kind movie in a lot of ways, seeing these two genres and these actors like Lugosi and Chaney interact with Bud and Lou are so different. And it's a fun movie, and I watch it a lot, and it's a Halloween classic. And so we have one film left, The Bride of Frankenstein, which it'll be bittersweet to end a Frankenstein series, but I think ending it on The Bride of Frankenstein is really the right thing to do. It's a great film, arguably the best horror film of all time, and I hope I do it justice. Until then, thanks for watching, and I hope you guys enjoyed this, and let's do October right.